Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. You're welcome back to the part 5 of our Python tutorial series for absolute beginners. In the last tutorial we talked about numbers generally in Python. In it we talked about the integers, float and the complex data type, the math operators, how to generate random number using the random function from the random module, and lastly we talked about the math module. And also I gave a practice question. At the end of this tutorial, you should know how to use the following. You should know how to use the conditional operators, the if and else statement, the elif statement, the ternary operator, and the pass statement. So let's get started. Oftentimes in our life, we usually want to do something provided that something else is true. For example, we want to go out if mommy says yes, or if it rains, we want to go out with umbrella. So this is called decision making. And to make decision in Python, we use the conditional statement, which are the if, else, and the elif statements. Before we dive into the if, else, and the elif statements, let's talk about the bool data type. In the last tutorial, we talked about the integers, float, and the complex data type. The bool data type, which is the short form for Boolean data type, has only two values, which are the true and false. And the bool data type are the results we get when we check for conditions. That is, any condition checking can either be true or false. The bool data type are also the results when we compare two or more values. And when we are comparing things, we either check if one value is equal to another or they are not equal, or if one value is greater than another or less than it. In order to do this comparison, which we either evaluate to true or false, we use the comparison or the conditional operators in Python. The comparison operators in Python are the double equal sign, the greater than, the less than, the greater than or equals to, the less than or equals to, the not equals to, the is, and the or. All these operators are binary operators, that is, they are used on true values called the operands. The first operand comes first, which is the left operand, then followed by the operator, which can be any of these ones, then the second operand, which is the right operand. Let's see an example of the usage of this equal sign. We know 3 is equals to 2 plus 1. So if we check 3 is equals to 2 plus 1, now this is going to evaluate to true because this statement is true. So we have our true now. But a statement like 1 plus 1 is equals to 3, that's going to be false. And if you use the equal comparison operator on that, it's going to evaluate to false. So if you have 1 plus 1 is equals to 3, that's going to evaluate to false. The equal comparison operator can be used on other data types like the float, the complex, and the string. We can also store these values in a variable and compare their variables. For example, we can have a variable as a num1 is equals to 3 and num2 is equals to 4. If we compare these two variables together now, it's going to evaluate to false because 3 is not equals to false. So if you have num1 is equals to num2, we are going to have false because that statement is not false. Also, we can compare strings. So if you have name1 is equals to Ahmad, that should be, and name2 is equals to Ahmad also. If you compare these two together now, it's going to evaluate true because name2 is equals to name1, we have true. So if we should change any of this one to something else, for example, if you change name1 to Ahmad with a small letter, if you compare the two now, we have name1 is equals to name2. This is going to evaluate to false because the name1 starts with a capital letter and the name2 starts with a small letter. That's not equal. Also note that this comparison operator is true equal sign. The single equal sign is used to assign a value to a variable. The greater than evaluates to true if the first operand is greater than the second operand. Otherwise, it evaluates to false. For example, we know 4 is greater than 3. So if we check 4 is greater than 3, that's going to evaluate to true. But something like 3 is greater than 4 is going to evaluate to false because 4 is greater than 3. And just like the equal comparison operator, this greater comparison operator can also be used on string. It compares two strings lexicographically, which basically means how the dictionary is arranged. So we know A comes before B. So if you have A is greater than B, that's going to evaluate to false because B is greater than A in the arrangement of the alphabet. Also, we can compare the float data type. For example, if we compare 3.4 is greater than 3.5, that's going to evaluate to false because 3.5 is greater than 3.4. The less than is the opposite of the greater than, and it only evaluates to true if the first operand is less than the second operand. For example, if you have 4 is less than 3, that's going to evaluate to false because 4 is greater than 3. And if you have 3 is less than 4, that's going to evaluate to true because 3 is less than 4. And just like the greater than, it can also be used on the string. So for example, if you have a is less than z, that's going to be true because a is less than z. The greater than or equals to is a combination of the greater than and the equals to, and it only evaluates to true if the first operand is greater than or if it is equal to the right operand. For example, let's say an example of this also. If you have 4 is greater than or equals to 4, or equals to 4, this is going to evaluate to true because one of the condition is true, the greater than is true. Or if you have 5 is greater than or equals to 4, that's going to evaluate to true also because 5 is greater than 4. This is more of like a combination of the equals to and the greater than. So is either checking are the two values equal or is the left operand greater than the right operand. So that's why 4 is greater than or equals to 4 is evaluating to true because 4 is equals to 4. Also 5 is greater than or equals to 4 is evaluating to true because 5 is greater than 4. The less than or equals to goes the other way around. It's check if the first number is equals to or less than the second number. For example, if you have 4 is less than equals to 3 now, that's going to evaluate to false because 4 is neither equals to 3 or less than 3. So if you have something like 3 is less than or equals to 4 now, that's going to evaluate to true because 3 is less than 4. We can also say 3 is less than or equals to 3. That's also going to evaluate to true because 3 is equals to 3. The exclamation and the equal sign means not equals to, and that's the not equal operator. It evaluates to true if a value is not equal to another. For example, if you have 6 is not equals to 7, that's going to evaluate to true because 6 is not equals to 7. That's the opposite of the equal sign. Also, it can also be used on any of the other data types like string. So if you have something like Ahmad with a small letter is not equals to Ahmad with a capital letter, that's going to evaluate to true because those two values are not equal. The is operator compare id, which is the memory address of variables or values, and the id can be checked with the id function. For example, if you have name is equals to Ahmad, we can use the id function to check the address of name, and this is going to return the memory address of name. If you have another variable with this same value, that is Ahmad, and if you check the id of this one also, we have id name, we are going to see these two values has the same id. So, and if you compare the two of them together now with the is operator, it's going to evaluate to true. Name 1, that's going to evaluate to true. The id is not something you should worry about much for now. Just know that the is operator works just like the double equal sign on strings and integers. There are other two complex comparison operators, which are the and the or. These two operators allow you to combine two conditions together. For example, you can have something like 5 is greater than 6 and 3 is greater than 4. 5 is greater than 6 is a conditional expression on its own. 3 is greater than 4 is a conditional expression on its own. The and is going to join these two together, and the and evaluate to true only if both conditions are true. For example, this 5 is greater than 6 is a false statement. 3 is greater than 4 is a false statement. This is going to evaluate to false because we have two falses here. Also, if you have something like 6 is greater than 5 and 4 is greater than 3, the first statement is a true statement. 6 is greater than 5. 4 is greater than 3 is also a true statement. This is going to evaluate to true because both statements are true. Also, we can have something like 5 is greater than 6 and 3 is less than 4. This also consists of a statement that is false and also true. But since one of them is false, this statement is going to evaluate to false. So we have 5 is greater than 6, which is a false statement, and 3 is less than 4 is a true statement. So this is going to evaluate to false because one of them is false. The conditional expressions or the comparison expressions that are combined with the and statement can be any of the comparison statements that we have been seeing since. So here's the truth table of the and operator here. So if the first statement is true and the second statement is false, the and operator is going to evaluate to false. That is, the overall expression is going to evaluate to false. Also, if the first statement is false and the second statement is true, the whole statement is going to evaluate to false. Also, if the first statement is false and the second statement is false, the whole statement is going to evaluate to false. The whole statement is going to evaluate to true if and only if both conditions are true. That is, if the first statement is true and the second statement is also true, it's going to evaluate to true. For the OR operator, the whole expression will evaluate to false if both conditions are false. For example, if you have 3 is less than 4 or 5 is equals to 6, this is going to evaluate to true since one of the statements is true. 3 is less than 4, that's true. 5 is equals to 6 is false. So, but this still is going to evaluate to true because one of the statements is true. If you have something like 3 is greater than 4 or 5 is not equals to 6, this is also going to evaluate to true since 5 is not equals to 6 is true. But if you have something like 4 is greater than 6 or 5 is greater than 7, this is going to evaluate to false because both statements are false. And here is the true table here also. So if the first statement is true and the second is false, it's going to evaluate to true. If the first statement is false and the second is true, it's going to evaluate to true. If the first statement is true and the second statement is also true, it's going to evaluate to true, and it's going to evaluate to false if the first statement and the second statement are false. So generally, you can just say if one of the condition is true, the whole expression will be true for the OR operator. And if a single statement is false, the AND operator is going to evaluate to false. Apart from the expressions involving these conditional operators that evaluate to true or false, all values evaluate to true except 0, 0.0, none, and the empty string. Also the empty containers also. We've not talked about the containers like the list, set, and the dictionary. We are going to talk about them in the future. To check if a value will evaluate to true, you use the bool function to check. If you have bool 0, this is going to evaluate to false. If you have bool 0.0, this is also going to evaluate to false. If you have bool empty string, this is also going to evaluate to false. So anything that is empty or is 0 is going to evaluate to false. But something like bool 1 is going to evaluate to true. Bool 2 is going to evaluate to true. So everything apart from the 0 and the empty ones are going to evaluate to true. For the containers, if you have bool empty list, this is also going to evaluate to false. Apart from all these, there's also the non keyword that evaluates to false also. This is also going to evaluate to false.